Well, good. Yes, it is good afternoon. Good afternoon, Michelle. How are you today?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Life, legacy, and legal. There
No
you go.
and.
Sorry?
No and.
Oh, life, legacy, legal. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
Very
Yep.
good. No, hey, today we've had a chat about this, and I just thought we'd talk about the fundamentals of estate and succession planning today. Does that sound like a good topic for you?
Sounds good.
And obviously with the work we do together with you and Tom and the team and so on, and as we work together, I mean, estate and succession planning is such a big part of what we do. As you know, I focus very much on the urgent, which is where you guys get involved. And to me, the urgent is, what happens if someone passes away at an inopportune time. And so the estate planning is always the priority in the work we do with our clients. To make sure that if something goes wrong, asset protection and all those sorts of things, fairness for siblings and so on is all taken care of, because there's nothing worse than the family having a bust up after mum and dad or one of them has passed, and not you as lawyers, but there are lawyers out there that just love it when somebody has a fight and they can charge lots of money to extend that fight. So we want to make sure it's all fixed. It's much cheaper always to fix it at the front, isn't it, than it is at the back.
Definitely.
So what I thought we'd start off with today, Michelle, is why it's so crucial for rural families, and what's the difference between estate planning, succession planning for rural families, apart from let's call them city folk, so to speak.
Yeah.
So, have you any thoughts on that?
Yeah. So
I know you've written some notes, so you can glance at them.
Yeah. So I see both types, rural and the city folk. And the biggest difference are often the structures the rural people have in place, and also in terms of their asset, which is typically a farm, is usually tied up in a partnership or a trust or something like that. And then there may not be much else in terms of other assets to distribute between children and to get what people want to call equality. Whereas your city folk might be, house, bit of super, couple of kids, split everything down the middle, no problem.
Life insurance.
Yeah. So it can get quite complicated with rural families, with all of their different structures and their style of assets.
Sure, and hopefully with the rural families too, the land is owned in one entity, the business is owned in another entity, and we hope for that when we meet people, but sometimes it's all owned together, which makes it even more difficult from, certainly from a succession planning point of view. But you're absolutely right. There's more structures and so on involved usually with rural families, and sometimes they've grown a bit like Topsy as well. They might have bought the first property, might have been in mum or dad's name. The second property after they get married then is in joint names, and then the third property, finally someone's given them some good advice and they bought it in a family trust or a company or something like that. So, but one of the things too, what's crucial certainly for rural families is, and we've touched on this already, is it's really about ensuring family harmony, isn't it? Excuse me, with all families, but certainly with rural families, is making sure that that old adage of being fair, not equal. And I guess you'd say that from time to time, wouldn't you, in regard to the problems that can create when you don't create fairness in your estate plan?
Yeah, definitely.
My apologies. I just accidentally pressed something on the keyboard there, and boom, there the video went. My apologies for that, and I gave you a fright, I know.
That's all right. I've completely lost my train of thought, so you're going to have to fill in that.
My apologies for that. No, we were talking about, making sure there's harmony in the family and making sure there's no disputes when mum and dad pass, because many times there's one farm and three kids and so on. Usually, for people who grow up in cities and so on and have a simpler structure in regard to what mum and dad's assets and so on, it's usually just divided by three, or give the house here to Fred, give that to Sally, and give that to Tammy. But in properties, there's not three properties usually to give away to all your kids, and so you have to come up with a process and a system that's fair for everyone and doesn't create family disputes. So that was kind of giving you that lead in there, and why it's so important to make sure that their plans are structured well legally, so that there aren't those disputes after they've gone.
Yeah, that's right. So in the city folk situation, equality could be fairness. That's what may be fair in that situation. But when you've got one farm, three children, often dividing the farm three ways is not fair, even though it's equal. So you need to weigh in all of the factors, whether a child works on the farm, if anyone has any interest in working on the farm in the future, what the others are doing. So a whole bunch of things comes into what ultimately is fair, and also what other assets are available for the other kids.
Sure, absolutely. And I know we've talked about that before, but setting up separate silos of wealth off farm is always such an important part of longer term planning that we help clients with, to make sure that, one, they've got their own independent area of wealth for when it's time for them to transition out of running the farm and letting one of the kids take over, but also for the off-farm children, to make sure there's the kid that ends up with the farm, isn't handicapped by a huge debt over his head just looking after his siblings. One of the second things we thought we'd talk about today, Michelle, was the role of testamentary trusts and what they mean effectively, and why they're vital for long-term protection for families. So rather than me talking about this, I'll hand over and you can explain what they mean.
I need a whiteboard.
Sorry, is that Tom?
Yeah. So testamentary trusts, they're similar to the trust you might create while you're alive. So often people create trusts while they're alive for asset protection purposes and also succession purposes. So these ones are just like that, but created in your will. So the will is not your typical leave everything to mum or dad and then split between the kids, full stop. It is a similar basis, but then you've got the trust provisions built into the will. So it's a bit bigger, but those trust provisions then create that asset protection. Once you've passed away, the trusts come into effect and the kids can take their share in a trust, which is extremely important when you're dealing with high wealth, difficult family circumstances, blended families, potential divorce for beneficiaries, tax planning opportunities, so a whole bunch of things.
That's never going to happen to me, none of those things.
No,
Ever heard
neither.
that before?
Yeah, every single time. Oh, no, they're pretty solid in their marriage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right.
You in a couple of years.
No, that's right. A testamentary trust will is not something you're going to get if you go to the newsagent. Is that fair? People that go and buy the news. Actually, I met a new client the other day, and they said, "Oh, would you like to have a look at our current will?" And I said, "Oh, yeah, I'll take a copy of it and we'll send it on to the team." Anyway, it was 3 pages long, and I thought, "Yep." Yeah. And they were telling me they had testamentary trusts, and I went, "Yep, you haven't got them." So anything you get from the news agency, or if you've only got 2 or 3 pages or 5 pages in your will, there's 99% chance you don't have good asset protection. Is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay. And the key, one of the things I wrote down here was, to think of a testamentary trust as a protective fence around your family's hard-earned assets, ensuring they stay within the family no matter what life throws at you. I thought that was a good quote I came up with, but I mean, the truth is, having testamentary trust does make sure that you can ensure the transfer of your assets goes through your bloodline, doesn't it? So it's always passing down from one generation to the next. And whether your neighbour comes and sues you for spray drift, or or you have an accident on your farm where someone crashes the four-wheeler and wants to sue that family, all your assets can be protected by the use of testamentary trusts, and certainly in the event of the key one, which is matrimonial protection, they're looked after.
Yep.
So the third thing we thought we'd talk about today, Michelle, was the importance of having a will, and what are the key elements in an effective will. You hear of these people that have, before they died, they grabbed a piece of paper and wrote down, I want to leave everything to Harry, and I want the car to go to Fred, and the motorbike to go to Jack, and so on. But the truth is, you really do need a legally binding document. And so, what are the key elements of making sure you've got an efficient and effective will? Just off the top of your head, I know you'll know all this.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Well, firstly is to get good advice, because you don't know what's going to be an effective will until you get some good legal advice, because the type of will that might be appropriate for you is not necessarily appropriate for your neighbour. So that's where I would start. And then after that, it's really important to have, you can do interim documents, and sometimes informal wills are okay, but absolutely they are interim measures only, and only in absolute emergencies. It's much better to have a proper formal will, fully signed, and even if it's a little bit over the top, it's still better to have it 100% formal, accurate, binding, effective.
What happens if you don't have a will and you die? But even I sometimes wonder what really happens in situations like that. So assume somebody dies, they're worth $10 million, and they were going to get to a will, but they never got around to it, or they got married. Is that right? Once you get married, your first will is void.
Parts of it can be, parts of it. Marriage and divorce can revoke all or part of your will. So best to, if you go through one of those life circumstances, update your documents.
I've got a feeling people who get divorced go straight out and change their will somehow, but
they really do. They do. A couple of weeks ago, we separated a couple of weeks ago. Okay, good on you for getting this sorted.
What took you so long?
Yeah. No, but if you don't have a will when you pass away, then it's dealt with under the rules of intestacy, which means there's a list of your next of kin. They find them, check if they're alive, and then that's potentially who your entire estate will go to. So it might not be the person you want it to go to, and it might not be in the split you want it to be in.
Yeah. So. Okay. And things like taxation, minimisation, and so on, are they things that can be dealt with in the will? Is there ways you can, use your proper estate plan to minimise what happens with your taxation liabilities? Not that people would minimise their tax.
No, just becoming a tax-effective document. Yeah, I don't know if you can hear that, but there is a whippersnipper right outside my window.
I actually thought you had a dog having a drink to there was a bucket beside you there, and he was having a drink. I was wondering what the noise was.
Yeah, it's a whippersnipper.
It's a whippersnipper. There you go. Okay. So taxation implications of, in other words, you can use wills, especially with testamentary trusts. I know you'll refer to that, but there's other ways too, aren't there, to minimise taxation implications?
Yeah, when you're dealing with things like superannuation, there can be massive tax consequences if that goes to, for example, an adult child as opposed to a minor child or a spouse. That can make a big difference in the tax outcome. And just also capital gains tax. If you're giving, for example, a home to one child and an investment property to another child, they might be worth about the same amount, but the distribution, once you've paid the tax, the capital gains tax, it doesn't work out the same.
In fact, that's a good point, isn't it, in regard to the superannuation? If you try and distribute your superannuation from within your will, and just say distribute everything evenly, that could end up that money from your superannuation fund that could go tax-free to a spouse, for example, or an underage child, would be taxed totally differently. So you don't say, I'll leave all my superannuation to my eldest child who's 34.
Yeah, that's right.
That would be a good strategy.
Yeah.
I mean, you've been doing this for a while, Michelle. What are the biggest pitfalls, mistakes that people make in regard to their estate planning, and what's your advice on how to make sure people don't fall for that?
I think probably the biggest one is not having a testamentary trust will, because they, as you mentioned before, I'm never going to get separated. My kids are never going to get separated. And then I will see them in a few years' time because something has happened or they've had a falling out with their child. So I think when a testamentary trust is important for that person and they don't accept it, I think that's probably the biggest one I see. Typically they'll come back in a few years' time, but it's better to, get it done right the first time.
Yeah, sure. Sure. And people do get divorced, sadly, and it's 1 in 3, and no matter how well your family are brought up, and no matter how well your children are brought up, I mean, it still happens, and it's better to always think an ounce of prevention is way better than $1 million worth of cure, and that's kind of what it's like in the legal industry, isn't it? If you can, even though there's a cost involved in putting stuff in place in the first place, it's way less expensive by about 10 times than it is trying to argue the case when it's too late.
Yeah.
One of the questions people ask is, why do I need to get this succession planning done properly? What are the key points? So I guess the question is, what sort of different family dynamics and business dynamics really come to mind when you think about, gee, I really, I hope those people come and get their stuff sorted, because it's a landmine waiting to happen. So I'm going to give you a bit of a head start here by saying, blended families, multiple generation families, and so on. They're people that really can hit grief, can't they, if it's not done properly? Do you get a lot of do you see a lot of situations where, and I guess these days more and more with the high divorce rate, people do get remarried and blended families, and that can create some real issues, can't it?
Yeah, I see a lot of blended families. It's possibly even more common than not for me for a blended family, and they're particularly unique because if they're giving everything to the other, there's nothing more that needs to be done by that person, and if they choose not to give to the family of the first to pass away, even though they've agreed at the time they made their will, there can be issues with that, or there might not be issues with that. But those are the things that are really important to discuss and find out the options available to you if you're in that situation. And then you make your decision from there. And then it's also really important to review every few years just to make sure it still works for you, because what worked 3 years ago and what you agreed with your spouse at the time might be very different in a few years' time.
Actually, that's a really good point.
Yeah, you can go.
Sorry, I thought you were going to keep going. So.
Oh no, I was just going to say there are also other types of families as well, separated families who want to look after their kids, and maybe they're not divorced yet, which can be a bit of an issue potentially. Yeah, lots of different people I see.
Okay. Hey, look, I'm going to come up with an example. I just want to use an anecdote here, an example of someone I met years and years and years ago. It was this guy was a motor dealer, and we were doing a lot of work with motor dealers and so on at the time as well. And very, very wealthy guy. He had 3 children of his own, and he separated and remarried a lady who had no assets of her own, and there's anything wrong with that at all. But he had a lot of wealth. His wife had nothing, but she did have 1 child, and the way they'd set up the will was basically "I love you" wills, meaning if he died, she'd get everything, and if she died, he'd get everything, which was a little one-sided. But I just asked him one simple question, and it was, he thought everything was fine. I love Sally, and I trust her, and she'll look after my 3 kids, and all that sort of stuff. And I said, well, what have you got in place to make sure that if you leave your $20 million to, your new wife, what stops her from taking that money and just spending it all on herself and her child from a previous marriage, and giving your 3 blood children absolutely nothing? What have you got in your documentation to protect that? And now, there's an obvious answer to that question. There was, the poor guy went 3 shades of red and had to resuscitate him, but suddenly realised that what he had in place wasn't going to look after his kids at all. It was because it actually became really clear when I had the conversation with his new wife. She actually couldn't stand the 3 kids of her husband. So there was it became really obvious to me there was no way knowing that she was ever going to pass on anything to his children. So we obviously he engaged us very quickly, and we went in, and she doesn't particularly like me at this point, but at the end of the day, look, it was his 3 children. He and his first wife, and I'll be honest about all this, it was he and his first wife that had the 3 kids, and their hard work over many, many years created the wealth. And we made sure the new wife and her child from another marriage were looked after, but the majority of the wealth we wanted to go to the original bloodline where the wealth had been generated. And we thought, I'll always stand by it and think that's fair, because that's where the money was generated, and it should go more to those 3 children. Now, having said that, I've also got clients that I've been working with for 20 years, and they've gone into second marriages, and I think of one straight away that the guy has 2 kids of his own. She has 2 kids from her first marriage, and when it first happened, I gave him the same advice that I gave the guy that I was just talking about, to make sure that all the wealth that he'd created ended up mainly with his 2 kids, and not immediately to her 2 children. But after 15 years, and they were happily married, and all the kids became one. They really did become one big happy family. And after 12, 15, now 20 years, the will reflects that if anything happens to the guy, his wealth is equally distributed between all the children. Those children have effectively become his children, and that's what happens in blended families. So and that's why it's so important to keep reviewing and updating your documentation, is because over time things do change. And what looks obvious from day one, and you think, no, we've got to protect this. After a period of time, what would be fair would be to look after everyone in that family. So there's my story.
Yeah, that's right. Things change. And there's no judgment cast when we meet and talk with these people. It's just making sure they've got all of the information so they can properly think about it with the information they know. So, yeah. It's
got to be what they're comfortable with and what they think is fair at the time. And, you sometimes got to look at it very objectively. But anyway, I like to throw in real stories like that, because those things happen in life, and sometimes you can get lost in a new relationship, or you can just get lost in life and too busy to think through these things. And I always think what we bring to the table, Michelle, is being able to see what the unknowns are for people, because most of the time people don't think about all the worst case scenarios, and I'm actually very good at it. When you've seen enough stuff go wrong, hopefully it coaches me then to ask the right questions and be able to guide people and say, well, I know you don't think this is going to happen, but this has happened, and this is the worst possible outcome if you don't do something about it. Okay. Tell me what we've worked together with Tom and yourself now for a long time, Michelle. Longer with Tom because he's the old bloke, but how do you see the role of a facilitator like me working in with you guys, and what are the strengths of having that sort of arrangement, and the role that you play in the work that I'm doing with a lot of rural families? Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, well, I think what you give to them before we see them is massive, and they come to us open-minded, open-hearted, and ready to listen. They trust you, so when we give them advice and you can reinforce that advice, I think it brings a level of calm and peace to them, and they can ultimately just be really happy with the outcome they get. And all of these experts helping them through this one journey, typically we get a really good result and some really comfortable people at the end of it.
Yeah. No, good, and thank you. I think estate and succession planning really is a team process. I posted something the other day because we've been burnt a few times through my life with accountants who, and there's great accountants out there, and they're a very valuable part of people's arrangements and professional advisors. But occasionally we strike one who believes that they have the ultimate relationship with their clients, and nothing can be done for their clients if it's not done by them, and sometimes that can come unstuck. But look, from our point of view, to me, I want to work with all the other professional advisors that people have, but I always do insist that when it comes, I'm not suggesting people don't keep working with their existing lawyers and so on for all the other issues, but certainly when it comes to the estate planning, succession planning, any legal advice or documentation we need, we insist on working with specialist professional advisors, people who just do estate and succession planning. So, I refuse to work with clients, GP lawyers, so to speak, and I think, because I need to know that the work that gets done for our clients is going to be a top level job and done by a professional firm that are going to have the right knowledge and the right outcomes. And it comes back once again too to many times you and Tom ask these people questions that they've never thought of, and I think that whole concept of the unknowns is very important part. And I know we're nearly out of time today, Michelle. We could talk for ages, obviously, but I just want to throw out there that we had some we had a client we'd started work with a little while ago, and you included were sitting in all the meetings we had up at your office, you, Tom, and Tracy and I, and we're helping this guy get through getting all his estate and succession planning, initially mostly his estate planning, and he was a little confused in regard to what to do in certain areas, and I just want to say how fragile life is, because we had a meeting with him, and 2 weeks later we got a phone call to say he was in hospital. He had cancer, he had a tumour on the brain, tumour on his lungs, and within about 10 days he was passed away. And you guys pulled everything together, and we made sure that all his wishes were taken care of, and you guys did a fantastic job. And whilst he passed away, and that's sad, and whilst I went to the burial and all those sorts of things, it's funny how people come up even at at the burials and at churches, and they give me a hug and thank me, because without good advice and a good team behind us, and including what you guys were doing, certainly, just especially in his case, it would have left an absolute freaking mess behind.
Yeah.
And I mean, you're aware of who I'm talking about, and if we hadn't done what we did, it would have been a bloody disaster. 3 kids and their families, and all the relationships in the background, previous wives and wife and all that sort of stuff. We made sure everything was taken care of. So, I just want to finish by saying, you need to treat this stuff carefully and with great respect, because the people we work with, have estates which are worth a lot of money, and you don't muck around when when you're dealing with significant estates. And I want to thank you guys for everything you did for that guy especially, and their family.
Thank you.
So anyway, thanks for the chat today, Michelle. Always good to talk with you. And anyone wants to chat directly with Michelle, your details, Michelle, are?
My email is Michelle at lifelegacylegal.com.au.
That's great. Have a great day, everyone. And Michelle, thanks for your contribution again today.
Thanks, Mark.
Get ready for